Texting Dan now.
No, there's like this. Thank you. So they had a big sign on the door that there had been an earthquake. So my son said, "See, Ma, I told you." My nephew stepped right through it. Like he knew nothing.
We're up.
My son would stay up. But when my nephew and I were lost in LA, we did quite a bit. My son would sleep all day. So wherever we were going, we would sleep. We'd get up, we'd go to the farm, we'd go to dinner. We do everything, and then we come back home and get lost, and he would go to sleep.
It's not a delay.
Yeah, it's not 20 seconds.
You guys are serious, though.
Yes, we are.
Hello. Hi. I want to invite everyone to take a seat. And if you're in a place where you can't see me, this room has a lot of structural pillars, as you can see. Feel free to move around. We also have these screens over here, so what's going on? We'll give it a couple more minutes and then get started. Thanks.
She's gonna come, but she has to be out by 8:30 or something bizarre like that. Oh, I forgot to set my watch. What time is it? My watch is on. Do you? That's a trek. How far? Right. Well, working at Monty can't be that far, even though Corinne comes all the way from Connecticut.
I know that from my parents.
Yeah, Zane and they live in Connecticut as well. I live in Harlem, my sister, so don't mess with me.
It's really exercise and preparation. It's like I try to reason with them and say, you know, rather than wealthy, my sister and I are not wealthy.
Yeah. You know, at home, everything resets itself. Except my watch. My watch, and I'm you know, the TV, everything resets. Everything resets. But not this. So I'm like, but I rarely wear my watch. Yeah, I was going to, I was traveling across, she loves to hang out with us. I was traveling across country and I had to like get disconnected twice. And it was place out the capacity because I was what time is it? Because you see the time. I don't know what time it is. So this guy finally said to me, hey, you have a cell phone? Yeah. Cell phone is on.
I know, it really is. I know, emphasis, exactly.
All right, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Christy Offenbacher. I'm a member of New York City DSA's Healthcare Working Group. I'm also the regional organizer in New York State for DSA's National Medicare for All campaign. I'm really thrilled to see everyone here tonight for Medicare for All. In a moment, I will introduce our speakers and talk a little bit about the purpose of the event tonight. But first, I just want to thank everyone who brought this event together and everyone for being here. A few people in particular, we have Mark Dedzik from the Labor Campaign for Single Payer. Sorry, Mark. I'd also like to thank other co-sponsors. We have PNHP, the Physicians for a National Health Program, New York City DSA's Labor Branch. We have the Campaign for New York Health, Heal New York. We have Students for a National Health Program, as well as New York Statewide Senior Action Council, African Services Committee, New York Caring Majority, and National Women's Liberation. And of course, an extra special thanks to our very own New York nurses. So NYSNA has not only co-sponsored, they have generously hosted the event right here in their space. at a moment when the union is preparing to take on the 3 biggest hospital conglomerations in the state in order to fight for safe working conditions.
Yes.
Judy Sheridan-Gonzalez is going to come up and give us a little bit more information about this a little later. Can we have a round of applause for our co-sponsors just one more time? So let me say a little bit about how this is all going to go down. First, we'll hear from a panel of 3 speakers who are going to share with us how the fight for single payer bears relevance in their workplace, in their unions, and in their lives. Then Michael Lighty will follow up on these testimonies by laying out the broader political landscape in which this fight takes place. And importantly, the case for why single payer and nothing less is the only solution to our current healthcare crisis. After we hear from our speakers, we'll have a question and answer session. Now, it's pretty hard to get questions from a crowd this size, so we have a special procedure. There are index cards floating around the room. If you have not received an index card, please raise your hand. We have ushers who are going to come around and hand them out. Has anyone not received an index card? We've got one over here, some in the front. Can I have an usher come up? Thank you. These index cards are for you to write down your questions, but you should also write down your name, your union or organization, and who your question is for, who on the panel your question is for. After Michael speaks, we're going to have Kale and Judy come up and talk about opportunities to support both the Medicare for All campaign and to support NYSNA in their potential upcoming strike. So while they're doing that, we're going to have our ushers, and again, where are my ushers? Can you raise your hand? Great. They're going to come around and collect the cards and deliver them to the stage. Now, the fact that this event is taking place at NYSNA, the largest union of nurses in New York State, is no coincidence. We're hoping to use the very location of this event to encourage the audience to consider and take seriously the essential connection between their struggle and the broader political landscape of the fight for single-payer health care. In order to win the first genuinely universal social program in the history of the United States, Medicare for All, we're going to need to galvanize the working class in this country. In order to go toe-to-toe with the elite financial interests who have a stake in the current for-profit healthcare system, we're going to need to move mountains. We need to mobilize and organize the working class majority in a way that we haven't seen in almost a century. So right now, we know politics is dominated by corporate hacks, by cronies and establishment snakes that want nothing more than to make the demand for Medicare for All basically just go away. But are we going to go away?
No.
Are we going to go away?
No.
No, we're not going away. 2019 is the most important year for us yet. We've got a brand spanking new, top-notch single-payer bill just introduced into the House of Representatives, which means this is the year to call for public hearings. This is the year to get that bill to the floor of the House so that we can increase and shape the public conversation about the political stakes of single-payer health care. Now, in addition to the opportunities around this exciting new legislation, we're looking at 2020 as possibly the single most important presidential election in this country since FDR. Last week, one presidential candidate drew a crowd of 13,000 people out in the freezing cold in his home borough of Brooklyn, New York.
Woo!
See, I'm not a political strategist, but it seems to me that the most popular politician in this country, running on the most popular demand, Medicare for All, that's just about the best stage we could have set for a powerful, truly historic campaign. So we need you all to leave here tonight armed and ready to take this fight to your workplace, to take this fight to your schools, to take this fight to your neighborhoods, and importantly, we have to take this fight to Washington. And that's what our speakers are here to help us do tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Marva Wade, to the podium. Marva is a registered nurse. She's a member of the board for NYSNA, and she's on the chair of NYSNA's Political Action Committee. She's a member of many board committees, including working with members and other groups for passing the New York Health Act at the state level and Medicare for All federally. Please welcome Marva.
I love it. Hi, welcome. Good evening. First of all, let me thank all of you for coming to our house. It's really great to have you here. You know, we do a lot of meetings here, and many of those meetings are about healthcare, of course. That's the work that we do every day, all day, you know, all 42,000 of us. So, as you know, I'm a registered nurse. I'm retired now. I worked at Mount Sinai, one of the largest not-for-profit hospitals in the city of New York, which is taking over the city of New York. They used to be on the east side on Fifth Avenue. They were the only hospital that had a Fifth Avenue Central Park address, and on the other side, the projects. So we kind of covered it all. Then they moved across town to St. Luke's Roosevelt. So we're pretty much all over the city right now. I am an OR nurse. I retired as an OR nurse. I think in everybody's life you find something that you love, and I absolutely loved working in the operating room. People that don't do that work are like, ew. Like all my family is like, what? How does that work? So, you know, it is what you find yourself doing and where you get your joy, and that was where I got mine. So I have a question for all of you, and to let you know something. We as nurses have for decades been saying that our health is not for sale. Not my health, not your health, not the patients that we serve. Unfortunately, that's the problem with the U.S. healthcare. Too many medical decisions are determined by how much money is in your bank account or how profitable it would be to be a provider. One of these buttons that I have on me says that there's two kinds of healthcare in New York, one for the rich and one for the not so rich. So some of those are struggling and others of those are not. No one sees it more acutely than frontline nurses, which 99.9% of our membership are. We have no nurse managers. You know, none of our nurses do that kind of work. If you are a manager, you are not in the union. So when I say we are front lines, we're at bedsides, we're in operating rooms, we're in home care, we're everywhere any New Yorker needs a nurse. So that's why we're saying in the forefront of calling for single payer. I can share with you that single payer health care is something that this union has been working on for 35 years. We introduced the concept to single payer health care, which is now Medicare for all, to Dick Gottfried. We were the union that took that to him, that introduced that to him. And I have to tell you, for all of these years, he has been carrying all of our water to make that the reality. You know, that New York Health Act, which is Medicare for all in the state of New York, has passed 4 times in the Assembly under his leadership. Now Gustavo Rivera, another champion, has taken it up in the Senate. So we believe, with the fact that we changed the Senate in the state of New York, and all of you should give yourselves a round of applause, that was our mission. You could not get anything done in the Senate because of you-know-who, the Republicans. Maybe I should whisper. There must be some Republicans in there. But Republicans get sick too, so, you know, we're all on the same page. So I want to ask you, usually in this part I put in a little something, but I want to ask you something. How many of you have ever been in an operating room? Not working, just hanging out. How many of you have friends or loved ones that's been in an operating room? Well, let me tell you, as an operating room nurse, when you say, well, you know, the OR is the OR. When you talk about healthcare, if you're that person on the worst day of your life, as pretty as I am, and I ain't got no shame, as you can see, you don't want to see me. You don't want to see me in my garb. I am the last person that you want to see. More than not seeing me, you don't want to get to see me, and me or some other person who works there tells you, as we hold your hand, as we try to comfort you, your case has been canceled. The insurance companies won't pay. You have to be rescheduled. We don't know what's happening with your insurance. We thought everything was all right, and it's not. So if you're that person, then you know what it is to be denied health care on the worst day of your life. Not everybody wants, you know, their eyes, their boobs, and butt lips. There are patients that come for real surgery. So to say no to anybody is really, you know, something that only fueled me to fight harder to do this work. So what we have here is nothing short of a crisis. Do we agree?
Yes.
Yes.
That if you're that person, if anybody in this room believes that they're never going to get sick, I want to be your friend. Now and forever until you get sick. So you know, over 1 million New Yorkers are currently uninsured. They have no insurance at all. Millions more are underinsured. They think they have insurance, but then when they need it, it doesn't cover what it is you think it should cover. So what we find ourselves in, an estimated 2,000 New Yorkers die every year due to lack of access to care. Those are illnesses that could be prevented. If you come and see a healthcare professional sooner rather than later, you have a better chance of survival. So unequal is really increasing, and your zip code can actually determine your life expectancy. I live in Harlem. I don't know what our life expectancy is, but I'm going to live until I can't live anymore. But if you live in really ultra poor neighborhoods, then just getting to health care is more of something that you don't want to do because you're not going to go there. You have to put food on the table. You have to pay your rent. You don't want to be in the dark. So all of those things are in competition for your health and your life. So, thank you. So to tell you that we're all burned out in the work that we do, why nurses are leaving the profession, is to say that we just can't do it anymore. Judy's going to be here, and she's going to talk to you about how we're trying to change what care is in our negotiations for hospitals. So I welcome you here again tonight. I could give you a whole bunch of stats, and I won't, because I want you to hear from somebody else besides me. So, you're on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marva. Next up, we have Marilena Marchetti, who is a school-based occupational therapist at the New York City Department of Education. She's a co-founder of Occupational Therapists and Physical Therapists for a Fair Contract and a member of MORE, the Social Justice Caucus of the United Federation of Teachers. Please welcome Marilena. Mic check, check, check. All right. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm okay. I'm not too loud. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. It's a pleasure to be up here with stalwarts for single payer, which is now Medicare for all. So as Christy said, I'm an occupational therapist and I work in our city's public schools. And I'm going to start my presentation tonight with some data from a report that was just released by the American Civil Liberties Union just this week. The report is called Cops and No Counselors: How the Lack of School Mental Health Staff is Harming Students. One statistic from that report says 14 million students in our country are in schools with police, but no counselor, nurse, psychologist, or social worker. In New York State, the average is 1 counselor for every 357 students. The professional standards recommend that there be 1 counselor for every 250 students, so we're way off. And I mention those statistics because I work with students who make them up. So basically what this looks like in practice is that for children who have psychosocial needs in school, police are treating them. Okay, just to give an example, I have one student, and every year I have a number of students who I could tell the exact same story about. He's suffering. He's in extreme emotional distress. And occasionally in the classroom, multiple times a week, he will hit himself. He'll become a danger to other students, throw books and pencils at them. And who do we call to intervene when that happens? We call a police officer, because we don't have a psychologist on site or a social worker on site, but we have a police officer. Yeah. This is a first grader. This is a 6-year-old child who's interfacing with the police because he needs support and love and the type of professional care that a social worker can provide, but we don't offer that in my school. That's a problem. Yes. That's called institutional racism. And it overlaps with institutionalized ableism. All right, so what does Medicare for All have to do with this scenario? So let me just give a brief history of how we came to expect and have health services in our public schools, and it has to do with special education. So before 1975, kids with special needs did not have a right to a free and appropriate public school education. They were relegated to institutions, asylums with horrible conditions, and their parents advocated really hard for them alongside disability rights activists and other civil rights activists at the time. They marched on Washington, they protested, they filed hardcore legal suits against the system, and they won. They won special education law, and it's now known as IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that law grants kids with special needs health services in the schools. So today, all kids are entitled, if they need them, speech, language services, occupational therapy, what I do, physical therapy, vision services, hearing, psychology, social work, counseling, and more. So there's a ton of amazing services that kids are entitled to on paper. All right? So this costs a lot of money to pay for these services. And to help pay for them, in 1988, Medicaid became an official funder of these services in schools, which is good because they help guarantee that they were provided by credentialed professionals, which they should be. But we all know that Medicaid is incredibly problematic. It's a federal program, but it's administered by the states, all right? And it's so complicated and bureaucratized and fragmented that it's constantly underfunded. The rules are changing all the time, and we can't have a coordinated national effort to reform it because of the differences across states. So for many districts across the country, they use Medicaid funds to have nurses on site, counselors, social workers on site. Some districts don't even bother because it's so costly. You have to have a separate staff that deals just with reimbursement. You have to invest in a major system of data collection to get Medicaid reimbursement. And folks may remember in 2016, the public advocate Tish James at the time, she sued the DOE for $356, saying they failed to recoup $356 million from Medicaid. She said, shame on you, DOE, you're costing our city money. Well, 10 years prior to that, Medicaid audited the DOE and accused them of fraud for overbilling for Medicaid services. So it's like, you can't win. The system is a mess. So, I mean, as I mentioned, what this looks like for students is police treating our kids. It also looks like kids simply not getting services that they're eligible for and that they are required by law to have in order to access the curriculum. In New York City, last school year, 10,481 students did not receive speech, OT, physical therapy, vision, hearing, or counseling services that they were owed. So then as a result, what sort of happens is that we underqualify students because schools will get a bad rating if they say a kid deserves a service and they don't provide it. So it means we're out of compliance. So then they just don't qualify the kids who need the services. So financially starving schools of money they need for health services is a problem. And it puts police on the front line doing work that professional healthcare providers should be doing. All right, so I'm just going to end with reading a quote from a New York Times article that reported on a federal task force on Medicaid, and I want you to guess what year it's from. All right. Medicaid should not be relied on indefinitely as the nation's primary approach to providing good health care for the poor and near poor. In its present form, Medicaid is probably incapable of achieving that goal. The task force believes that a full solution to the problems inherent in the Medicaid program can be found ultimately only through the establishment of a national policy of financing health care, a policy which treats each of our citizens with equity and justice without regard to what state he lives in. Any guesses when that's from?
That's a long time ago, right?
1970.
Yeah.
And the problems are still true today, 50 years on. And I just mentioned that to say no amount of data and studies and information is going to bring us healthcare justice. It's going to take a movement. And I believe that nurses, OTs, people on the front lines of this healthcare problem have a duty to expose the injustices, and we also are in a position to challenge it and disrupt the system.
Yes.
Thanks to our unionization. So yeah. Yes, thank you, Marilena. Next up, we have Michelle Brailsford. Michelle has been a registered professional nurse for over 25 years. She's worked at some of the largest hospitals in New York State, including in emergency rooms at Montefiore Medical Center and Mount Sinai and Orange Regional Medical Center. She currently works at Montefiore Home Health Agency as a home care nurse. Please welcome Michelle.
Thank you very much. Well, my name is Michelle Brailsford Paul, and I've been a registered nurse for 25 years. And when I became a nurse, all nurses, we take a Florence Nightingale oath. And some of the oath has to do with purity, but more importantly is to protect and provide care to the patients that we come in contact with. However, with a lot of the diagnostic related groups and with the insurances, it's very difficult for us to actually do that. The reason why is because the healthcare system that we live in right now is causing a lot of problems with that. Nurses are not able to work within our scope of practice because we are faced with so many emergency settings and so many emergency situations that do not allow us to provide the care that we so desperately need to provide to you. So what has changed in the last 25 years? A lot of things have changed for me in the last 25 years. More importantly, what has changed for me is that I feel that I can't work as a nurse the way I would really like to. When I became a nurse because I wanted to be nurturing, I wanted to be caring. I wanted to make a difference in this world to the people that I was providing care to. However, because of the insurance, we're not allowed to do that. I'm a member of the New York State Nurses Association. I'm a proud member of it. And, you know, as nurses, we fight. New York State Nurses Association does not just fight for nurses to work within their scope of practice. We fight for you, the community, the patients. We fight so that every patient is a VIP. That's one of our models that we always use. Every patient is a VIP. Patients over profits. But unfortunately, that's not the case. The hospitals, the healthcare systems, they have changed a non-for-profit organization into a profit organization. And that's where it has to stop. One of the things that we're trying to do now, as far as our contract is concerned, the New York State Nurses Association, is that we are trying to set standards for our nurses and for the, more importantly, the healthcare system. We want there to be ratios so that when you come into the hospital at your most vulnerable point in your life, when you're sick, when you're weak, who's the first person that you see? The first person is the nurse, the registered nurse. And we're not able to give you the care that we need. We need standards. We need it to be, because the California nurses have standards, and we need standards as well. And that's why we want the community to come together with us so that we can fight hard for you, the patient, because this is what you really need. More importantly, we want to take the profits that these hospital executives are making and the hospitals are making, which are not supposed to make profits, and we want to put it into the patients and the care that we're providing. I used to work in the emergency room setting, and I've had a lot of different areas and different situations, because I remember I had a patient. They used to come every month, like a frequent flyer. He had advanced cardiac disease. He had congestive heart failure. I could never understand why was this patient coming in every month. And I said to him, you know, just take your medication. And you know what he told me? He says, you know what, Michelle, it's between paying my rent, taking my medication. It's between having lights and paying my medication, because his copay was anywhere from $400 to $500 a month. Some pills are $15. We have medications like Lovenox, an injection for atrial fibrillation, that it can cost up to $2,000 a month. That should never happen. He should not have to choose between eating and getting the quality care that he deserves, that this United States, you know, the government of the United States has. You know, it's a very rich country. Why can't we give patients or individuals the care that they need? Now that I'm working in home care, which is basically a hospital without walls, it's a trickle-down effect because of the overcrowding in the hospital and the fact that patients are being discharged a lot sicker, a lot quicker. When I came into home care about 20 years ago, people are coming out with chest tubes now. We're doing procedures that are supposed to be done in the hospital. Now it's carrying over into the healthcare. And that's a big problem also. But what happens is, what I'm finding out is that these big pharmaceutical companies, there's a big problem. One time I went to my patient's house and I counted his pills because I was pre-pouring his medication. He was short of 5 pills. I called up the pharmacy. He's short of 5 pills. I asked the pharmacy, how much is each pill? $15 a pill. I said, oh, so you short in 5 pills? He said, no problem, I'll send it. Because these are the way that some of these companies get over on some of our patients. But more importantly, I try to tell my patients, when you have medications, a lot of these pharmacies, you can go to different pharmacies and you can barter the prices, which a lot of people don't know. CVS, Walmart, Target, different things like that. You can go to these different companies and sometimes you can get cheaper prices. So that's another thing that I try to encourage my patients to do. When you get medications, you need to really look at them, you need to count them. More importantly, what I want you to realize is that as we go on with our contract, the New York State Nurse Association with the 4 Alliance hospitals, Mount Sinai, New York Press, Montefiore, and Mount Sinai West, I want you to know that we are fighting for the community. We are fighting for the rights of the patients. We really wanted the community to lobby with us, to galvanize our nurses, to realize that it's not about the money. It's about the quality of care that we want to give our patients. It's not about nurses making these astronomical salaries. We're not doing that. We're trying to work within our scope of practice. We're trying to do the best that we can to provide you with the care that you so desperately need. I want you to know that it's very important that as we come together, there was a news conference last Thursday when we said that we probably will go on strike. It's very important that you reach out to your senators, your legislators, to let them know that you do not want the nurses to go on strike, because what I want you to realize that our baby boomers comprise about anywhere from 30 to 40% of our nursing population. And when they retire, there's going to be a nursing shortage, and there is a nursing shortage as it is. So when they're saying that they're ready for the strike, these hospitals, they're not really 9,000 nurses, and we already have a nursing shortage. Where are they going to get these nurses from? Are they going to be the nurses that are going to provide the care that the nurses that we have in the hospital now are providing? So we're asking, New York State Nurses Association is asking for the community to get behind us and support us in as much as you can do. Write your legislators, come to our informational pickets, but more importantly, go to those hospitals and you let those CEOs know that we care about our nurses because they are a respected profession. And you know, we're voted as one of the most respected professions in the country. And I want you to know, like, one of our mottos for the New York State Nurses Association is every patient is a VIP,
Yes.
patients over profits. And that's very important. I want you to always live by that. We're here for you, we're here for the community. And the New York State Nurses Association will continue to fight for the nurses to stay within our scope of practice so that we can provide the care that you so desperately deserve and need, because quality care is what's important for you. Okay? Thank you so much.
What an incredible group of 3 women healthcare workers. Can we just have one more round of applause? Finally, we're going to hear from DSA's own Michael Lighty. Michael currently serves as a Sanders Institute Fellow for over 25 years. He's organized, written, and spoken on the politics and promise of Medicare for All. From 1994 through 2018, Michael worked for the California Nurses Association, NNU. Michael sits on the political subcommittee of DSA's National Medicare for All campaign, where we send him to tour around the country to preach the gospel of single-payer health insurance. Welcome, Michael.
All right. Yes, it's true. I've been trying my act on the road, so I had to bring it to New York. So I am very proud to be here with Marva, Marinella, and Michelle. It is a great honor to be here in NYSNA. I have had the pleasure when I was working at National Nurses United to work with NYSNA, the New York State Nurses Association, in a number of areas. And their leadership in this fight for the New York Health Act is powerful, it's crucial, and it is absolutely going to win and lead the way. So thank you. So in those 25 years or so of working with National Nurses United, I learned some fundamental lessons about healthcare and about the human condition, and fundamentally about the importance of kindness, about the difference between a healthcare industry and the caregiving profession that registered nurses enact. I learned about the importance of demanding Medicare for all, the example of nurses fighting in the streets for Medicare for all, but also going on strike for safe patient care. Those are the same fights. And the nurses' leadership taught me something very fundamental. Nurses never give up on their patients.
Never.
And will never give up on their country, and neither should we. Let that be a lesson for all of us. We should understand that the nurses' commitment for a single standard of safe therapeutic care enacts equality at the bedside. Every day they take patients as they find them, regardless of any other factor. And yet our healthcare system discriminates in fundamental ways based on a whole set of factors. Nurses don't. Let that sense of equality, let their ethos animate the kind of healthcare system that we want to create. And what's striking to me is that as the nurses do this, they teach us that we're not only demanding Medicare for all, but we're also demanding the end to the social disparities that cause most of the health conditions in this country. And then not only that, they teach us to get to the underlying political economic system that is responsible for those social determinants of health. What's underlying homelessness and poverty? This is the fight that registered nurses have taught me to engage in, and that's so much at the heart of what DSA is about. And we see this rampant injustice in the misogyny of the present administration, the right's unrelenting desire to control women's bodies. And yet women are mostly the caregivers in our society, often living longer, taking care of their families, taking care of themselves with unique needs that this health system doesn't often address. And so health justice, as we are on this path for health justice, must mean repealing the Hyde Amendment, as the Medicare for All Act of 2019 does. That's right. Abortion is a necessary health service. And we also must mean prohibiting discrimination based upon gender stereotyping, based upon sexual orientation. This is, again, reflected in the Medicare for All Act of 2019. We also see injustice in the many manifestations of structural racism. The arrest, fines, and jail time suffered disproportionately by young black men. The ongoing impacts of the historic exclusion from the labor force of East Asian and Pacific Islanders. The death, disappearance, and indifference of Puerto Rican Americans as a result of the recent hurricanes. The uninsured rate among Alaskan Natives and American Indians is more than 2.5 times white people. Uninsured among African Americans is twice as high. And yet the healthcare system doesn't address this. So when we talk about Medicare for all, when we talk about health justice, it must mean eradicating all those barriers to care based on race. That structural racism is inherent in the healthcare system when black women are dying in childbirth at higher rates in this country than in many other countries, in most countries of the world of comparable economics. That is a manifestation of the structural racism we must end through Medicare for all. And so we also see injustice at the borders. Just this week in the New York Times, we learned 200 more kids were separated from their parents. Wow. Imagine the psychological toll. You're fleeing violence and poverty, extreme violence in your neighborhoods. One 18-year-old was bullied at school because she was HIV positive. Her head put in a toilet 5 times in the course of just a small short period in her school days. She was returned to her home country. This psychological toll is a public health crisis, and it is with us every day. The poor nutrition, all of it adds up to a public health crisis. And registered nurses have taught us very clearly, there is no border when it comes to healthcare. Viruses know no wall. Nothing stands between us. And in fact, Dr. Martin Luther King said it very well. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. Is there a better statement about both the connection between immigration and guaranteed health care than Dr. King's words? So health justice must mean covering everybody in this country, regardless of immigration status, as does the new Medicare for All bill. And it's clear that these social injustices both lead to and are reinforced by a basic injustice in healthcare. That it is, in fact, extraordinary when we look at it that the ruling class has a special disdain for universal health care. And though guaranteeing health care as a human right would not eradicate these disparities, these injustices. It would undercut the economic insecurity that underlies them. It would, in fact, be a powerful affirmative response to the misogyny and the white supremacy, the xenophobia, as it would greatly improve the material conditions of women, people of color, and immigrants. This is a system that takes public health seriously, that understands these connections in all aspects of our lives, because healthcare is that policy that affects us in the most intimate areas of our life. And so it is natural that we make these connections both among ourselves and broadly in society. Rooted in health justice, this system would enable us to collectively address, as I mentioned, not only the social determinants of health, but the underlying causes, the systemic roots of those ills. And on this path to justice lies a confrontation with power. And this is something our movement needs to understand, because we are literally in the fight of our lives, and it is not going to be easy. Because the ruling class does have a special disdain for universal health care. Think of it in New York. We have made extraordinary gains. $15 an hour minimum wage in New York. The pre-K child care, or child preschool education. The other extraordinary gains that the unions have made in this city. The unionization rate here is like Canada. And just for those of you who haven't been to the rest of the United States, it's a lot different elsewhere. It's a lot different in South Carolina, where it's about 3% union density. This is an extraordinary place, and yet what don't we have? We don't have the New York Health Act. We've been fighting for the New York Health Act for 35 years.
Yes.
That should tell us something. That should tell us something about the unique challenges and disdain that the ruling class has for this. Because no matter what gains, they don't want to make guaranteed health care in. And you can understand why, but on the other hand, it's quite extraordinary. Think how popular this reform is. 70% of Americans want it. 80-85% of Democrats. 52% of Republicans in an Ipsos Reuters poll favor it. Those Republicans who made $30,000 or less in 2016 supported it in the exit polls. Oh, it's so popular. You would think, God, what political party in the world wouldn't demand something that 80% of their members want? That would be the Democrat Party. That's right. We need to understand this. Now, we also, it's like we have over 107, I think now, sponsors of the new Medicare for All Act in the House. That's the real deal. This is a very comprehensive piece of legislation. If you're for that, you definitely are for guaranteed health care. Similarly, in the Senate, Ted Kennedy, who was the champion of this issue for decades, he never had a dozen senators for Medicare for All. Bernie Sanders has 15. We have to recognize what an extraordinary achievement this is. And so, yes, it's a very popular idea, but my favorite quote of this week was Alex Lawson, who heads Social Security Works. And he said in this article today, he said, yeah, the donor class likes to tell us what's politically possible. We're not going to let them do that with Medicare for All. We're going to be driven not by the donor class, by what the people demand. Wow, that sounds like democracy. Because, of course, this is a wildly popular idea. But what do? They call it crazy. Literally, they call it crazy. I don't want to give David Brooks any airtime. Man, that guy's got way too much airplay. But he said, oh, it's a great idea, but it's an impossible dream. Imagine that, an impossible dream. It's too crazy. All right, let's talk crazy. You ever heard of United Health? United Health's the largest health insurance company in the country. They made $12 billion in 2 years under the ACA. Hold it, I thought the ACA was going to rein in the insurers, Marta. No. What happened?
They made more money.
They made more money. $12 billion in 2 years. The CEO of United Health last year made $66 million.
Bonus.
Including bonuses. All right, so any United Health subscribers here?
Yes, unfortunately.
Okay, I want to thank you for your contribution on behalf of Stephen Helmsley. All right. So here's the thing. You know, I don't hear the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee attacking United Health for, and this is a judge in California, don't take my word for it, a judge in California said, They denied people psychiatric care in order to save money. Oh my God, I'm shocked. How did that happen? That's just a judge saying that. It's their business model. That's actually their business. Talk about crazy. A company that focuses on coverage of Medicaid recipients. It's a private insurance company, but they get all their revenue essentially from providing coverage to Medicaid recipients. They made $1.7 billion in profit in one quarter, or in revenue, sorry, that was not profit, that was revenue. But they had fewer members. So they had fewer customers, but they made more money. Now, I may be a socialist, but that doesn't sound like capitalism to me. I mean, think about it. What are they selling if they make more money when they have fewer people? They're not selling healthcare. They're selling their own profit, their own revenue, their own business model. That's crazy. Now, currently, this effort to control costs, I think we can all say, has been a failure. The Affordable Care Act has not controlled costs. Why is that? Why are prices so high? No, why is cost so high? Because prices are so high. Why are prices so high? Because they can charge whatever they want. The insurance companies can charge whatever they want, the hospitals, the drug companies. So naturally, when the drug company raises their prices, the insurance company raises their rates. Oh, well, the hospitals want to get in on that act, so they too escalate their charges. They hire more administrators, they hire more marketers, they create boutique health centers. New York City is maybe the example of these, best example of the country, of these very expensive medical centers that are essentially designed for the global elite. That's who goes to them. The CEO of a new big shiny medical center in San Francisco was asked, well, why are you building all these private rooms and such fancy concierge services and all these treatments and so forth? And he said, and he really did say this in the paper, well, you gotta attract the sheiks if you're gonna make money. This is what it's about. When you talk about the world's best healthcare system, you're talking about a system that benefits the wealthiest in this country and leaves the rest of us to suffer. We did an economic analysis through the UMass Amherst Research Institute, the Political Economic Research Institute. We found that if you actually look at what the wealthy, the top 10% spend on healthcare, they get so much tax subsidies that they actually don't pay anything for healthcare. They make money on healthcare. They're making money on healthcare. There are people in this country who have guaranteed healthcare. They are the wealthy. And that system is the same system that creates the dividends through the pharmaceutical companies, that creates the profits of the hospital corporations and the insurers. And those profits, of course, are owned through stocks, relatively small numbers of Americans. It turns out those people are also the donor class to politicians.
Yes.
Connect the dots. They don't pay anything on health care. The tax subsidies are basically propping up a system that benefits them hugely in terms of their own investments. Those investments then fund the political system that perpetrates the system. Angus Deaton, Nobel Prize winning economist in 2015, said healthcare is the worst example of crony capitalism. It is a driver of inequality. This is not unknown. It is simply a benefit to a sector of society that holds the greatest amount of power. And it's clear they're not going to give us this system easily. But what we have to do, and what they're not doing currently, is we have to make them defend it. We have to make the head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee not talk about how costly Medicare for All is, which she is doing, by the way.
Yeah.
We need her to defend Stephen Helmsley's $66 million. We need her to defend a system that was supposed to control costs and instead enrich the insurers at our expense, that left 30 million or 29 million people in this country without insurance, 41 million Americans underinsured because their deductibles are $2,500. 40% of Americans don't have $400 in the bank, and the average deductible is $1,300. Do the math. It doesn't add up. And so that's the system that the Democrats should have to defend. Nancy Pelosi says, oh my God, that's a scary number. How can you afford that? Well, the question is, how can we not afford it? Because frankly, Speaker Pelosi, Everybody already says Medicare for all is cheaper. Even the Koch brothers said it. Right? They funded a study that said, well, if you look at all the offsets and you figure out what's going to cost, the current system costs $2 trillion more. I thought it was too expensive. No, it's not too expensive. It is simply an expansion of government that threatens the very notion of what government can be. Imagine these other countries. They've said that, oh my God, it's too radical. Yet every other industrialized country has done it. Okay. Why does every other industrialized country guarantee health care as a human right? Because it works. It's the way to keep their societies healthy. And it also creates a sense of social cohesion and solidarity that we don't have. But isn't that also perhaps the reason, one of them, that they oppose it? Imagine if government just didn't make wars and protect property, but guarantee health care for everybody. Imagine if we didn't regulate behavior and tell people what doctor you could go to or what prescription you could get or what you can't do when it comes to health care. Imagine if instead we regulated prices and everyone could get the health care they need when they need it. It changes the very definition and conception of what government can be, and it fundamentally changes the political and economic system that maintains the present healthcare system. But what I really think is funny when they say, oh yes, Canada, it's so, you have to wait for care, and it's such a bad system. They, you know, and it's just not American to adopt the Canadian system. As I said, well, okay, so the Canadian system's so bad, they're marching in the street for Aetna, right? No, they're not. They're not marching in the street for Aetna. Of course they're not. Who would want this system? No one. Now, when they're not claiming it's too radical or too expensive, they're saying, oh, well, it's not really what you think it is, right? Have you heard this? Medicare for all isn't what you think it is. I love that. I think everybody in this country kind of knows what Medicare for is, because basically they see their parents, themselves, their grandparents struggling all their working lives just to make sure they have health insurance, and then when they turn 65, it gets a lot easier. And all of a sudden they can go to the doctor of their choice. They don't have a barrier to care. They have a guarantee. People know the difference, I think. And the notion somehow that they can confuse this is all they got. It's all they got. And it kind of works, right? Because you see Senator Harris comes out, co-sponsor of Senator Sanders' Medicare for All bill, says, yep, we're going to get rid of the private insurers. Well, what do you mean you're going to get rid of the private insurers? Well, you know, there'll be a role, don't worry. And all of a sudden, are we getting rid of private insurers or not? We don't know. And here is where we have to take this issue of confusion very seriously, because they make claims that are just false. They make claims that, well, if people like their insurance, they can keep it. Okay, we'll do a survey. Because I keep hearing this. Every time I go to Washington, I keep hearing. Everybody wants to keep their private health insurance. Who wants to keep their private health insurance? All right. So they asked this poll question. They say, well, you know, Medicare, that was a zero. This before the cameras, that was a zero. 1%. Did somebody say they like their plan? All right, no, I mean, it's reasonable if you like your plan. What I think we need to say, though, because there are some very good plans in New York State, by the way, New York City, very good plans. We can talk about those in particular, but what I would say is this. It's very tough to keep a great plan if no one else has it. Ask the airline pilots how their pensions are. They were the most elite workforce in the country with the best compensation and pensions, and they've been eviscerated because of deregulation. That is the kind of dynamic we're talking about in healthcare as well. So to sow this confusion, they talk about these different aspects of what Medicare isn't, or what Medicare for All can't do, or how difficult it is, or maybe we can just keep private insurance. But the problem is, of course, that if you keep private insurance, you're still going to have claims denials. We estimated at NNU that was $200 million a year. They did a study of the health plans under the Affordable Care Act offered through the exchange. 1 in 5 plans, 1 in 5 claims rather, were denied. 1 in 5 claims were denied. So what are you going to do about the claims denials? What are you going to do about the copays? What are you going to do about the premiums? And I love this. I love the politicians who come out and say, oh no, Medicare for All, that's too radical, that's too expensive, that's crazy. I'm a pragmatist. So I want to I'm Senator Klobuchar, and I'm a pragmatist. I want to limit families' healthcare spending for premiums, for insurance premiums, to 9.5% of their income. Wow, that is pragmatic. And you know what I want to say, you know, I haven't studied philosophy for a while, but I always thought pragmatists solve problems. I think they're confusing pragmatism with expediency. And so it's expedient to turn a talking point into a healthcare policy. How we did it before. What's the Affordable Care Act? It's a talking point. What is keep your private insurance? That's a talking point. So they created this whole plan, Medicare Extra for All. And it is, I think, though, a striking evolution in kind of the liberal or neoliberal center in American politics, because they've moved from 2016 from never ever, if you remember that, to Medicare Extra for All. So that's progress. But what they're doing is they're essentially consigning a whole set of Americans into a private health insurance system that is fragmented, inefficient, and based on denial of care, relies upon tax subsidies to be profitable, and a mandate in order to have customers. They want to keep people in that system instead of putting them in a system of Medicare for All. And it's simply not going to solve the problem. And that's why it's not pragmatic. Now, I think we should just step back and say, okay, when you talk about Medicare for All, let's be clear about what we're talking about. And so we at the Democratic Socialists have come up with a very handy-dandy guide, which I believe is available in print as well. What are the key principles of a single-payer Medicare for All system? Because really, we're talking about converting a hugely profitable industry, which is essentially subsidized by workers, either our out-of-pocket costs, because every time the boss gets a cost increase on health insurance, it's the worker who pays, right? Every time the premiums go up, we're paying more. Every time they want to save money, 30% of employers change plans every year. So all those people worried about, oh, stay in the private sector and keep your plan. Well, in 3 years, it's not the same plan. So how does that work? These are the realities of healthcare. And those realities, I think, are lost on many people. Medicare spends about 3% on administration, private insurance 12% on administration, and then you add on profits and marketing and so forth. This is the kind of inefficiency and fragmentation that the alternatives to Medicare for All continue, and that's the difference. So when we talk about moving from a hugely profitable industry subsidized by workers to one that puts people over profit, patients over profit, as Michelle said, it's a single health program. A single health program, everyone covered by one insurance plan, administered by the federal government, equal access to all medical services and treatment. That's the bottom line. Ask your neoliberal friends, if you have any neoliberal friends, if their plan guarantees health care on an equitable basis for all. Can't do it. No, well, yeah, it's equitable for all the United Health subscribers, but the Aetna subscribers, they have a different deal. No. Comprehensive coverage. Now, this is very important. I was talking with Joel here beforehand. Seniors, for example, have the most to gain under a Medicare for All system, because currently it's estimated that 20% of seniors by the year 2030 will pay 42% of their income for health care. So Medicare as it is not doing what it was supposed to do. That's because it's been heavily privatized. Part B is a private plan. Part C is a private plan. Part D is a private plan. That was the amazing thing. Okay, let's design a drug benefit that covers seniors but is still profitable for the pharmaceutical industries. I got it. We'll create a donut hole so seniors have to pay a bunch of money, and that will be the profits for the pharmaceutical companies. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to provide comprehensive benefits with no co-pays, no deductibles, no insurance premiums. So the next time the polling question wants to know whether people want to keep their private insurance, how I would phrase the question is not do you support Medicare for All if you have to give up your private insurance? What I would rather ask is, would you like to eliminate all insurance company premiums, deductibles, and co-pays and never have to deal with the health insurance company again? I think we'd still get 70%. Just a guess, it's speculation. But it's the same question, isn't it? So it's comprehensive coverage. Dental, vision, mental health, and pharmaceutical drugs are included. That's very important because Medicare doesn't include those. Long-term care. If you read the language under the Medicare for All Act of 2019, it is extraordinarily generous in terms of in-home support services, community-based care, services for disabled. It is a gold standard. It actually raises the level of true access for people with disabilities to a truly equitable standard. It is absolutely extraordinary, and that's what people in this country want. That's what people in this country need. They don't want to be told, yeah, I'll just change insurance plans every 3 years. No, that's not an alternative that solves the problem. But most important, free at point of service. As Mary Nell says, the fact you have a small copay will deter care. It might be $1, it might be $5, it might be $15. You're still not going to get the care you need if it's not free at point of service. Don't let them tell you it's free. That would be a good thing, first of all. But of course, we are paying taxes. We're paying publicly for healthcare now. 60% of healthcare spending is public. Is tax dollars. We're just not getting our money's worth. That's the difference. Because they've chosen to regulate behavior and not prices. Because they've chosen to create an industry based on profit revenue and not a caregiving profession. Finally, it's universal. As we mentioned, non-citizens are covered. And we take the jobs transition very seriously. 1% of the entire budget is devoted to job retraining, pensions, income maintenance, and transition for workers affected by this reform. Because that's right, absolutely. And we need to take this message to Hartford and say, insurance workers, administrative staff, whether you're in the public sector represented by DC 37 or in the private sector, we are going to take care of you. You are not going to be sacrificed by this reform. And in fact, we're going to create a better healthcare system and better jobs. That's the promise of this reform. Now, despite this decade-long fight, it is true, when I started, I had more hair. That happened. And we've been in this, I was talking to Mark, emphasis on Old Home Week, right? Emphasis on old. We're not proud. We're doing the best we can. All of us have been fighting the good fight. The nurses have been on the front lines. The other workers in healthcare have been on the front lines. But now is our moment. Now is the time to accelerate and accept our historic responsibility, because despite their decades-long effort to maintain this system, it is crumbling. And believe it or not, despite some of the pessimism, we are actually winning. And that's what they're so afraid of. And I love this. They always went to maintain their healthcare model. The three favorite words they use. Have you ever heard these? Choice, competition, innovation, right? It's like, don't mind the man behind the curtain, Stephen Helmsley, who just got $66 million. Watch your wallet when you hear those phrases, because that is how they justify the present system. That's how they justified unregulated pharmaceutical prices. That's how they justify the fact that insurance companies can charge whatever they want. That's why they justify hospital corporations turning into palatial care centers for the global elite. Choice, competition, innovation. And the truth is, there is none of that in the present system. There's innovation for profit. There is choice for the wealthy, not the rest of us. And the only competition is to see which sector gets the most money from each of our healthcare dollars. That's the competition. Is it going to go to the hospital? Is it going to go to the pharmaceutical company? Is it going to go to the insurer? So how do we overcome that? Because we have won the policy debate. We know it's more efficient. We know it guarantees health care. And we know that every other country has done it successfully. Now, David Brooks may see that as an impossible dream, but I think that shows more about David Brooks and what he thinks is possible or appropriate. How can you live a moral life? How can you be someone who claims to be promoting morality when you will leave hundreds of millions of Americans stuck in a system that is designed to deny them health care? How is that a moral life? It is not. So we have a very simple demand. and that is people get the health care they need when they need it. Is that true when you're in United Health?
No.
Is that true when you're in Aetna? No, it's not. And that's the difference. It is a principle of no barriers. No barriers to care. Addressing those injustices and no barriers to care. Life expectancy in this country is going down. That has never happened before. We are experiencing a public health crisis of despair and desperation. The only reason people want to keep their private health insurance is because they're desperate in case they get sick, because they know they're on their own. 42% of cancer, that is people with cancer, go bankrupt within 2 years. But it's an impossible dream to stop that, right? So here we are. Our demand for guaranteed health care generates unity precisely because it can unite folks on the basis of our own economic insecurity and address the particular barriers that apply to those folks who don't have equal access. It is both. It is both a unifying demand that directly addresses the human condition of working people in all of our complexities. That's its power. So how do we go about winning? And here as elsewhere, we have a great deal to learn from our teachers. Because teachers, we saw tens of thousands of teachers, West Virginia, Oklahoma, Arizona, then in Los Angeles and Oakland, going on strike. In West Virginia, it started with health care. It's expanded. Now they're fighting the privatization of the education system. But it wasn't just mass action, it was also a sophisticated communications and PR machine. But when we confront the healthcare issue, this is what the New York State Nurses Association is teaching us. We have to take that direct action. We have to take the fight to the streets, and we have to make a public fight over the state of our healthcare system. And we have to do it with sophisticated communications because, of course, they're a failed business model among insurers. Basically, they just need tax subsidies and a mandate. But they are a powerful PR machine using our money against us. And so we got to go after them. We got to go after them as a strategic corporate campaign that takes them down and makes the Democrats who shill for them vulnerable and exposed. That we have to expose those Democrats who are defending this murderous industry. That's the difference. And if we do that, that's right. If we do that, right, then we will understand the value of strategic leadership at all levels. And here there is a particular segment of the labor movement that will be very powerful and persuasive. And it's not the leadership at the top levels. It's the folks who are rank and file workers on bargaining committees dealing with the boss when they want to take away our health care. It's the labor negotiators who are dealing with the boss when they say we can't afford to lower our co-pays and deductibles. Those folks, you all need to rise up and tell this story because the Beltway is only hearing from those who have a vested interest in the present system. They are not hearing from the people on the front lines doing the bargaining, suffering the consequences of this private health insurance system among labor. And you must rise up and we must speak out. Because if we don't, then they will get away with this notion that we just want to keep the plans we have. But instead, what we want to say to our brothers and sisters who have good plans, we want to join you. We want everyone to have what you have, and we want to protect what you have. We want to protect those workers who may be displaced, and we want to guarantee health care with no barriers. Because I know even in the best plans there are barriers. I know even in the best plans, a pharmacy benefit manager will tell a patient that the doctor's orders will be ignored and you will get a different prescription. I know even in the best plans, when you retire, you're going to be stuck with hundreds of dollars in co-pays and premiums. And so that is what we need to speak out about. That's what we have to reveal. So we are part of this national fight because strategic leadership matters. And that leadership is at all the levels. Our chapter, our union locals, and yes, at the presidency. Because I don't think there's anyone in this room who doubts that if Senator Sanders becomes president, he will fight relentlessly for Medicare for all.
Woo!
That's right. He will fight relentlessly. Say what you want. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that. And that makes a huge difference. But it's not enough. It is literally both the combination of strategic leadership at all levels and mass action. And that means mass action, going right to the insurance companies, taking the corporate campaign. We had an event at White Plains last night. We sat in the hallway to do the event. We said, next time we're going to sit in at United Health. That's what it's going to take, taking it to them. Because we've had a lot of opportunities. In the 40s, in 1993, the AFL-CIO decided to support Hillary Care instead of single payer. 2009, we knew single payer was the only way to guarantee health care, but we didn't have the political will. Now is our moment. We understand how fleeting this could be. And we have to have a floor vote. We absolutely have to have a floor vote. How else do you know where they stand? How else do we know? They can say anything. They do say anything. But their vote, then we can hold them accountable. Then we can hold them accountable for this murderous industry. As Dr. King said, of all forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. And we need to understand that this is a matter of life and death. That people will die if we don't change this healthcare system to Medicare for all. This is a movement to save lives, fundamentally. And it is a corrupt moment. And as we reject that corruption that's got us here, we can share this alternative vision for an equitable society, an ethos based on caregiving and kindness that the registered nurses have shown us. Working people can make the decisions that determine our lives and our destiny, with healthcare being the opportunity. And if we do that, then we can truly change the ethos and the political economic system that got us here and that inhibits our future freedom. Because without health, how can we be free? And that's why we say nothing less. Thank you.
Woo! Thank you, Michael. Next, we're going to have Judy Sheridan-Gonzalez. She is the president of New York State Nurses Association. She's going to come up and tell us, give us a little bit of an update. What's been going on here at NYSNA. After that, while she's doing that, please hand in your index cards with questions to the ushers who will be coming around. I'm going to read 6 of the questions out afterward and give our panelists an opportunity to respond to them, and then Michael's going to provide some closing remarks.
So, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our home. So, I'm so glad Michael talked about mass action and rising up and fighting back, because the nurses in New York City and in New York State are rising up and fighting back. We always think about, of course, we've been supporting Medicare for All when it was called single payer, and I forgot what we called it before then. I think we called it Medicare for All. I think we called it Healthcare for All. I can't even remember. We keep trying to find a sexy term for it. But, everybody knows what we're talking about. But we see the other side of that is that not only do we need a different financing mechanism and getting rid of the insurance companies, but we also need to make sure that there are enough caregivers to take care of you when you do enter a hospital or go to a clinic or see a doctor. And what we find, particularly in our large medical centers throughout the state, that we are not staffed appropriately. And while we have some bills in the state Senate and the state legislature for safe staffing and for Medicare for All, we're also trying to negotiate these terms in our contracts. So since October, 3 of the major medical systems in New York City, the big medical empires, Mount Sinai Medical Center, which includes St. Luke's and Roosevelt, that some of you might know by those names, New York Presbyterian, and Montefiore Medical Center, those 3 empires, with about 10,000, 11,000 nurses within, have decided that we are not going to take no for an answer, and we are going to demand and win safe staffing ratios for our patients, community involvement in our hospitals, and safe workplaces for everyone. The bosses absolutely oppose this, and we've been in negotiations. We've had 24 sessions, and I don't know how many of you are in unions in this room? Anybody? So we don't have one tentative agreement, one agreement on not one item after 24, not one, not even we will comply with the law about safe patient handling. Nothing about we will facilitate the release of nurses on their own dime, on their own time, to go and rescue people from disasters. Now they're not understaffed, but they can't let one nurse out of 1,000 go to take care of people after an earthquake because they don't have enough staff for that. So that's the situation we're dealing with, and as a result of this kind of obstacle to anything that we want to win, the nurses decided that they were going to take a strike vote. And out of the 10,000 and change nurses in the medical center, 9,000 voted, and 97% of them voted for strike. Pretty good plurality. So, we're hoping that the pressure on the medical centers will force them to come to the table and discuss these issues with us. They absolutely refuse to discuss ratios. They have a spin on it, just like they have a spin against Medicare for All, where they paint this picture. It's nonsense that having more nurses to take care of patients will result in worse care for our patients. They say that. They actually, the news media came and they said, what does that mean? I said, I don't know. You know what it means? They say that having more nurses at the bedside to take care of patients will remove our ability to think critically. They say that, that's what they say. They say having more nurses at the bedside, which will allow us, having break nurses to cover our breaks, because we can't take breaks, because in an emergency room like the one I work in, you're supposed to take care of maybe 3 or 4 patients. We could take care of 10, 11 at a time, and if my colleague wants to go to lunch, I'm taking care of 22. So they say that, and we say, we can't take our breaks. They say, well, file a grievance. That's what they say about that. So their narrative is wrong. We reject their narrative. We wanted to have something in the contract that allows community input into the care that they receive. In our hospitals, they're also overcrowded because of this insurance system that we have, where 150% occupancy brings in the bucks, and 89, 90, 95, 99% occupancy, they lose money. I still don't understand that very well. But so what we have in my hospital, for example, they cram patients in the emergency rooms, that there's no room to move between the stretchers. We have an emergency room with 50 cubicles, and we could have 200 people in there at any one time. You feel like you're in a MASH unit. I heard that's a generational thing. People don't know what a MASH. When you get older, you have to reframe your points of reference. I know there's a few people I can see know that. Like a disaster center after an earthquake. We have patients who are admitted upstairs to the units, and they're placed on stretchers in hallways, up to 8 at a time, with a thin screen protecting them from the drafty hallway, no bathroom, no toilet. Meanwhile, they have hospital floors that are empty. 2, 3, 4 floors that are empty with nobody in them. This is the system that we have, also based on the fact that we have insurance companies in charge. But in addition, even if we get Medicare for All, which our dream looks like it might come true very soon, we also need to have safe staffing. And with the money we save with that kind of a system, certainly we could afford it. But this is our struggle. So this is a struggle for the community. We if we go on strike, which seems pretty likely, pretty soon. This is not a nurses' strike. This is a community strike. This is a strike for health care for everybody. This is a strike for compassionate care, for kind care. We don't want any more nurses having to say, not being able to hold the hand of a patient who's dying because they have to go resuscitate a patient in the next room, not being able to allow or facilitate a mom to bond with her baby because somebody's bleeding out in the next room, not to be able to talk to a family about a horrendous diagnosis because somebody in the next room has to be suctioned who has emphysema and there's nobody there to do it. We don't want to have to triage our care every minute of every day. We want to be able to give the care that our patients deserve, and that's why we're going to go on strike if we don't get the things that we need. So this is a strike for everybody. This is a strike for healthcare. This is a strike for our community, and I hope that we can count on your support. I know that there's something going around, right? Some clipboards for strike support. Is there a phone number on there? Is there
more information? 844-82-NYSNA.
Okay, 844-82-NYSNA. What is that?
844.
Mic check. 844-82-NYSNA. And or you can solidarity@nysna.org. Okay. As things heighten, as things tense up, we're definitely going to need your support. We know we're dealing with vicious employers, and the more community support we have, the better. So I appreciate you listening to this long diatribe about our situation, and I hope that we can count on your support. There are some flyers that are in the back, on that back desk, are they? We're going to have a rally with perhaps some important announcements on Monday at Mount Sinai Hospital. You're welcome to come and testify if you wish. There'll be press there about your own experiences. How many of you have had less than stellar experiences in a hospital? Anybody here? How many of you ever been to an emergency room? Was it wonderful? But it could be. I mean, obviously you're sick and we see people suffer, but it's the unnecessary suffering that matters. And just a little statistic for you to go home with. About 15 years ago, the Institute of Medicine reported that 400,000 people die every year from medical errors, and that's reported medical errors. We believe that figure, they believe that figure might be 10 times as high. Registered nurses are the greatest mitigators of medical errors. So how many deaths do we see? The press always says to me, well, have you ever seen anyone die from understaffing? Yeah, that's what they say. I say, 400,000 a year. I said, do the math. We have a big city, we live in 8 million people, so do the math. I mean, this is true. There are deaths, there are terrible outcomes as a result of not having enough staff, aside from the fact that there's no compassionate care. So, single payer, Medicare for all, safe staffing ratios, two sides of the same coin. Thank you for listening, and we hope we can count on you.
I just want to say one thing, Christy. The Medicare for All Act of 2019, HR 1384, mandates staffing ratios as part of the bill, as part of the new system.
All right, there are so many good questions that we received from the audience just now. I've had to do the hard work and choose just 6 of them. I'm going to read them aloud now and then give our panelists, maybe from the far end to the near, an opportunity to respond to these. Michael will close us out. And then we're going to have Kale come up and explain a way that we can support single-payer advocacy through DSA, and also support NYSNA. Right now, at the end, we're going to come up and take a group photo.